welcome to our fifth episode of Agile TD Mondays. Today are with me Karen Greaves and Sam Laing, and both are going to talk about Agile and distributed teams, and they will give you some tips to help Agile work better in distributed teams. So now to you, Karen and Sam.
Cool, thanks very much. So I'm Karen.
And I'm Sam.
And we're here all the way from Cape Town, South Africa. So it's kind of appropriate that we're talking about distributed teams on a distributed presentation. So that's kind of cool. Okay, so this is our presentation, dealing with distributed teams. Is anyone there? And that's really funny because I have no idea if anyone's listening to this right now. Do.
So does any of this sound familiar at all?
Beep. Karen's joined the call.
Bing. Sue's here.
Bing. John's here. Hi. Hello. Hi. Was that John? Are you there, John?
This is Sue. Is this the accounting meeting?
No, Sue. I think you've got the wrong meeting.
Okay. Bye.
This is my call with John. John.
Sue has left.
Can I hear you? Can you hear me, John? John? John, it sounds like you've got some interference. You might want to hang up and dial in again. Beep. John has left the meeting.
So did that sound familiar? Maybe a fragment of it? Maybe all of it?
So often remote calls can sound a little bit like that. And it makes people think that distributed meetings are a bad idea. But imagine if you could work from anywhere in the world, even the beach.
Imagine if you never ever had to sit in traffic to get to work or to get home after work.
Imagine if when you were sick, you could stay home and not infect the people in the office with your illness, because even if you've got a critical thing to do, you could just work just as well from home as you could from the office.
What we'd like you to think of is what is possible. What is possible if we worked remotely? Most people think that you can't work remotely because of all these negative things. But if you were forced to, how could you do it in a way that was fun and exciting and just as good as face-to-face?
We love face-to-face communication, but we also don't like traveling a lot. And so as Agile coaches, we've decided to embrace this remote thing and see if there's things that it can offer us that are actually even better than face-to-face communication.
So there are various types of teams that exist in this remote world. Some of them are in the same time zone, and that's a fairly easy problem to solve. Some are in a time zone where there's quite a bit of overlap, like 6 hours. And that also there's some things that we can suggest there. And then there's ones that have absolutely no overlap in any time zone. And for those, we even have suggestions for you.
Yeah, so regardless of whether you're just in a different city to someone, or if you're across a whole different continent, there's things that you can do to work better remotely. Here's some of our tips for the different time zones. Let's start with if you're in the same time zone. So this usually means that you all work roughly the same hours, but you're not located the same. It could be that the other team is across town in another building and you don't see each other face to face that often, or you could be in Europe and South Africa, so far away and never have met in person, but at least you cover the same time zone. What we recommend here is focusing on synchronous communications. So things like having video calls and use the technology to support that. Our favorite technology for this is Zoom. It seems to work so much better than the others. You can also use Slack as a tool to have quick chats with people, or Google Hangouts. We once heard of a team that had a video wall in their one office, which basically projected the entire office of the other office, and they had the same thing in the other side. So what would happen is people in one office would walk up to the wall and they could see the other people if they were at their desk. They could wave at them and ask them to come over to the wall to have a conversation. It was almost as if it was just a pane of glass between the two offices, but actually they were in two completely different locations. So go wild with your ideas of what's possible here.
If you're in a partial overlap time zone, what I mean by this is maybe you only have 3 hours that overlap during your work days, or 2 hours, then we want you to focus on shared understanding. Most teams that we know of that have a partial overlap use this time to have a daily stand-up. A daily stand-up is more easily communicated via email or a video conversation than it is. So what we'd rather you use that precious time that you have in overlap is to understand what your team's going to work on. Maybe have your backlog grooming session during this. Talk about what is it that you need to build together as a team. How are you going to test it? How are you going to build it? How are you going to work together as a team? It's a much more rich environment for you to use that precious 3 hours. You could also focus on having sub-teams that are in similar time zones. So instead of one person in America trying to work with someone in Europe, if you happen to have 2 people in Europe in the similar time zone, have them work together in a sub-team rather than a sub-team being across different time zones.
Maybe you just want to explain what you mean by sub-team there, Sam.
A sub-team, say you have a team of 6 people, a sub-team might be 2 people working together on a story or 3 people working together on a story, not the entire team.
Cool. And then what about if there's no overlap? So we've heard 2 versions of this. One is if people are in 2 completely different time zones. Another one was actually with a group of people who are working shift work, and so they worked different shifts. One worked a shift during the day and one worked a night shift. So they never had any time in common. And a technique that works really well here, Sam already mentioned it, is if the team that's finishing up their work that works first does their stand-up at the end of the day and they video record that stand-up. Then as soon as the next team comes in, the first thing they do is watch that video. Video is a really quick thing to do. It's very quick to just have your stand-up and record it. But yet it's such a rich form of communication. So the other team can be completely up to sync, and it's so much faster than writing an email. Something else that we recommend doing is have one person who kind of rotates out on a slightly different schedule. So one person in one of those locations would come in a little bit later and work a little bit later. That would allow that one person to have some partial overlap with the other team. That one person would then be doing some of the things that would be happening in partial overlap. For example, getting a shared understanding of requirements from that team. And that's what they would share back with their team. It is important to rotate that person. So it's not one person who's always getting that shared understanding and passing it on like a business analyst. Rather, a different member of the team should do it at all times so that you're building good communications between the 2 different teams. And also share the burden. Don't always make the team in one location stay late to participate in meetings and the other team work normal hours. Alternate between one team staying late and the other team coming in early so that it's fair to see teams on either side. Also, kind of like the sub-team idea, if you do have multiple people, try to get your teams closer together in the time zone. And here we mean the teams who are working on one piece of functionality or one story. It's a lot easier if you need to collaborate multiple times in a day if you're in a similar time zone.
So that was a lot, and there's still more. Here are our top tips for distributed meetings. And what we want you to think of here is often people complain that they sit in too many meetings and meetings are wasteful and they don't know why they bother. Well, if you've ever been to a meeting that's been properly facilitated, it wasn't a waste of time and you would have gotten value out of it. And we want every single one of your distributed meetings going forward to be as valuable as they possibly could be.
So the first thing is to make sure you use good tech. We've already mentioned Skype and Zoom and Hangouts. As we mentioned, Zoom is our favorite one. It tends to work best with our bandwidth. But test them all out and see what works best for yourself.
Invest in a good headset and microphone. This way, you will have clear sound coming in and clear sound going out. And it's much better than dealing with all the ambient noise around you.
Take a look at some tools that enable you to collaborate remotely. Trello is a great one it's a really simple tool just to have shared boards. So if you want to look at a board and be talking about that at the same time, then you can use that. And Slack is a great tool for chatting and talking about all sorts of work, and you can check that. Either you can get notifications or you can check it asynchronously when you want to.
If you have more than one person sitting at a location, invest in a USB speakerphone. It's what we're using to record this call. It really helps when two people are talking, because then you have noise that interrupts each other, rather both speak into a speakerphone.
I believe the technical term for that is feedback, Sam.
Feedback. Thank you, Karen.
Cool. And finally, a couple of tools that are really helpful if you want to have shared whiteboard space during your meeting so that you can see what's happening, and it's like having a whiteboard. Board Thing is a great tool, or just using Google Draw will allow people to draw on the same whiteboard even though they're in different locations. So that's our first tip.
Next up is working agreements. So some of you may have heard about this before and others might not have. These are great to have even when you have in-person meetings. So one of them is a thing that we like to call bottom lining. On a telephone call or anything where you can't really see other people, you tend to lose attention twice as quickly as you would in an in-person meeting. So instead of telling a whole long story about how you got to your conclusion, we ask you to bottom line and just tell the conclusion. A simple one-line statement. And we encourage everyone on the call to ask people to bottom line if their story is taking too long or they find themselves checking out.
Another thing is that it's quite easy with the delay in phone calls and not being able to
have
necessarily
someone
see
talking over.
to have people talking over you.
So rude.
So it doesn't happen intentionally on voice calls. It happens by accident. But it's a really good idea to have a working agreement about what you're going to do if that happens. You can either have an agreement that everyone stops and people agree the order maybe via a chat window of who's going to speak, or you can have a facilitator who notices which two people are both trying to say something, and they can call on the people individually so that it can prevent that.
Next up is to always have a disaster plan. If you've ever dealt with a team in Africa, this is so important because there are always disasters happening here. Either we have no electricity or we have no internet.
Or someone digs up the undersea cable.
Something always happens. So if you were going to meet by Skype, if someone's not on Skype, where should you go look for a message? Is it in Slack? Is it on someone's phone? Is it in email? Should Skype go down, are you going to then join a Google Hangout? Do you all have the link to that second place? Just have a plan in place for what if things go wrong, what is the next step? We even have a plan for this call. Apparently we're just going to keep talking because it's being recorded.
Wouldn't it be funny if it actually the call had died right now and we were just talking to our laptop?
It would be.
Cool. So make sure you know that disaster plan. And the last thing that's really important to help calls go better is to be comfortable with silence. It's something Agile coaches are used to anyway, but it's even worse in calls. Because everyone's trying very hard not to talk over each other, there's often long silences on phone calls. But if you introduce it as a working agreement at the beginning and tell people that it's okay to have silence, then it means that they can take that time to think and then phrase what they want to say. They don't have to try and fill the space, which is what helps people check out.
Thirdly, good voice trumps bad video, especially if you're dealing with teams or members in locations with poor internet, like the tip of Africa. So rather focus on turning off the video and focus on having good sound than having a broken video and broken sound.
We often find that if bandwidth is not great, then just disabling the video will improve the voice quality. And you can create some really, really good conversations with just voice. In fact, one of the things we found was that when we were having coaching calls with people, if they didn't have to look us in the eye through video, they were actually willing to be a little bit more open and share things and be more vulnerable than they might have been in person. So sometimes that can be a good thing.
Number 4, create the same experience for all. Karen touched on this a little earlier when she was talking about time zones that were completely different. So if someone is at home in your team and the rest of the team is in the office and you're going to have a dial-in call, rather have everyone dial in, even if they're sitting in the same office. The reason being, if the 3 people in the office sit around a table and dial in the one dude that's at home, they are having a different conversation. A, they might forget to dial the guy in. I can tell you I've been in numerous meetings that happens.
I've done that.
And B, when you can see someone, you're communicating with your body language and your facial expressions. And the guy at home cannot see that and thus is missing out on half the conversation that you're having.
Also, often if only one person is dialed in, there might be a problem with the remote tool and no one in the office actually realizes that the person on the phone can't hear them. If everyone's dialed into the same tech and the tech fails, everybody knows immediately. Our last tip, Sam already mentioned that for a conversation to go well, it needs to be facilitated. And so what we're saying is make sure that you prepare to facilitate your remote meetings as well. Just because it's a remote meeting and you have to think a little bit more creatively, it's not an excuse not to do fun and different things.
Use things like the chat window or tools that you can type into so that people don't have to constantly be talking. They can also give feedback via or ask questions in the chat window. And also think of using things like Board Thing and Google Draw, something like that, to act as a virtual whiteboard. So people can create stickies and move them around the board and can actually interact with each other.
All those things that you do in your in-person meetings, there are ways to simulate those in remote meetings as well. One important thing that you need to do is make sure you take breaks. So just because you're in an in-person meeting, everybody thinks about making sure you take bio breaks or even just breaks so that people can, breathe and think.
Get coffee.
But somehow when people are doing it on the phone, they don't allow time for that, which means that people tend to do it while the call's happening and they just check out for a little bit. So rather plan a call. If you're having a call for longer than 90 minutes, we would highly recommend having a break in it. You don't even have to hang up on the call. Leave the call going, kill the video and audio, and give everyone 10 minutes to go get some coffee and come back. If you let people know that they're going to do that, then they'll be paying attention more of the time.
Aaron.
And don't mess with your slides. That's what happens when 2 people try to use the same slide.
I want to say something around be creative. There is so much going on in the world and the internet of things these days. Every single day there are new tools. In fact, I think Google Draw has actually stopped working because I couldn't find it the other day. But there are many, many new tools out there and more coming every day. We were just on a distributed retrospective call the other day, and when we Googled it afterwards, there are 3 new online retrospective tools that we could use for the meeting.
We're going to try Scatterspoke next, which is a new one that we just found out about.
So go out there and look for new ideas.
Great. So to summarize our top tips, number 1, use good tech.
Number 2, have working agreements.
Number 3, let good voice trump bad video.
Number 4, have the same experience for everyone.
And number 5, make sure you prepare and facilitate the meetings.
You can find some more tips at www.remoteagilecoach.com.
Cool. So thanks very much for listening. Over to you, Sabine.
Thank you, Karen and Sam. The question is how to manage single persons that are remote. It's hard for the remotee to follow discussions and contribute.
Yeah, so I think what we said about that is try to let everyone have the same experience. But also I worked with someone where one person wanted to work from home. Everyone else enjoyed working in the office. And actually they didn't contact him very much because they were so used to that. So if you are the one person who is remote, then you need to go to extra effort to try and find ways to connect on those channels so that people remember that you're there. Often it's out of sight, out of mind. So things like Slack is a great way to just hear the chatter of what's going on in the office. And if you start to use that a lot, it'll be the thing that the people in the office start to use anyway. And then this experience is the same.
I know of another great tool. So I think it actually happened to Lisa Crispin when she had a hip knee, I don't know. She had something done. She had to stay at home for a long time. And what her team did was they bought an iPad and they taped it to a bar stool. And she was basically on, I think it was Skype, but she was on Skype. Her little talking head was on Skype on the iPad. And they wheeled her into meeting rooms and sat her at a table so that she could see everyone and speak to everyone as if she was there.
Now you can buy the whole little robot that does it for you for like $2,000.
Yes.
But another idea you can do is have other people try work from home for a couple of days. Even if they can work from the office, just doing it for a couple of days to help them see what the other person experiences can build some empathy with that person. So there's another idea.
Thank you. And there's another question. Do you have some generators for remote retrospectives?
Yes, I guess we do. We've been doing a couple of those recently. So I think you can still plan your retrospective exactly like you would plan an in-person one.
And then just think about, are there ways that you can use existing tools that you are familiar with online? Because you also don't want to ask people to sign into 20 tools for one retrospective. So you want to kind of limit it to the tool you're using for your call and maybe one other. But for example, if you've got access to Trello and you run the discussion part of your retro using a Trello board where people can put in new cards for discussions and you can move them across the columns, that would work for a lean coffee style conversation.
It would also work for a simple retro of what went well, what could be improved by just creating those columns in Trello. So Sam has a good point, which is pick your activities for the remote retro based on the tools. You don't want to jump to a different tool for every single activity in the retrospective. But the other thing is to remember to give people time to think. So in an in-person meeting, you might say, let's all jot down some ideas on sticky notes, and you can see as a facilitator if they're writing things or not. You need to, again, be comfortable with silence, because if you ask people to write notes and they're not instantly appearing on your whiteboard, you don't know if it's because they're still thinking about writing or if they just have checked out. So give them a timer and let them know they've got 5 minutes, and then run a timer and don't interrupt until that timer is done.
Top tip, in your check-in activity, the first activity you have in your retro, be sure to use that other tool so that people are using the tool that they're new to and not so sure and not comfortable with in a short activity where you can help them.
Yeah, as a way to get used to using the tool. So for example, we did one recently where the check-in question was something about where you live and what you like to do outside of work, and we got people to create a note in Board Thing during that call because we were going to use Board Thing for the rest of the retrospective. So use your checking activity as a way to start using the tool. I think that's all our tips on that, Sabine.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Next week is Alex Schladebeck, and she's going to talk about how to stop hating UI tests, and I'm looking forward to it. Join me. Thank you, Karen and Sam.
Cool. Thank you.
And I hope to see you again in Potsdam.
Yes.
Yes, we hope so. Cool.
Bye.
Bye.